All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Our final spring 2025 environmental speaker series talks, and we're joined today by a number of our environmental studies first-year graduate students who will be sharing their thesis proposal topics. So much like the last few weeks, we'll have a series of speakers in quick succession, and then time for questions at the end. So make sure you note who your question is for if you're taking notes, and then we'll have one big batch at the end. Cool. And thanks as always to the College of the Environment and the Alumni Association for supporting our talks. Without further ado, turn it over to our first speaker, Prizma. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Wow, a lot of familiar faces. Nice, good for me. Anyway, I'm Prizma Chapagain, first-year grad student at Environmental Studies, and my thesis title is Assessing Indigenous Traditional Knowledge in Rural Agriculture of Nepal. I come from the country with the highest point in the world, Nepal. Nepal has a very unique landscape where elevation within short distances changes dramatically. People who live in this unique landscape have deep connection with their environment. The majority of population here depend on subsistence farming, which is less about economy, but more about survival. Their survival, however, is threatened by climate change. Shifts in rainfall and temperature bring new challenges for these farmers to adapt to. Recent studies and projections indicate that these changes in temperature and rainfall is going to get worse, particularly for farmers who depend on farming. Do you guys like rice?
Yeah.
I love rice. Well, these farmers depend on rice for their survival, and it meets 50% diet requirement of Nepalese people. Farmers here have developed place-based knowledge from a long time ago, and we can call this knowledge indigenous traditional knowledge. Indigenous traditional knowledge has guided agricultural practices over 500 years. However, as climate change shifts, so does the role of indigenous traditional knowledge shift. This brings me to put forward my research question. How do rural farmers in Nepal harness indigenous traditional knowledge for farming rice in this changing climate? And to what degree does the policy support or not support farmers' indigenous traditional knowledge in their policy framework? I'll go to Nepal in just exactly 10 days from now to talk to farmers, to learn more about the climate-induced challenges they are facing, the role of indigenous traditional knowledge in farming, and my research will provide recommendation to climate change adaptation and policy framework by empowering the voices of farmers. The world is changing rapidly. If we do not empower local voices, incorporate this traditional knowledge into policy framework, we could be missing a key component to successful climate adaptation and long-term resilience. So this is an important topic to look about and to research on, and that is what I'm doing right now. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amaya Coblentz. I use she, her pronouns, and my thesis is titled Confluence in the Courtroom, Claims to Expertise and the Contestation of Environmental Knowledge in Territorial Arriba County, New Mexico, between the years 1900 and 1912. So in this region of the American West, precipitation is too low to support steady crop growth, and therefore agriculture has always relied on the diversion of water. And in New Mexico, hundreds of years of communal management of this water has resulted in a cultural and historic acequia management system. And through several iterations of colonization with the Spanish, the Mexican, and the American, these all left a complicated tangle of claims to water as a resource. Now, research in resource distribution and dispute is critical as we move forward into a drier future. This particular research is a historical analysis of the construction of expertise during water disputes in Territorial Arriba County, New Mexico, as seen highlighted on the map on the screen. So I have a bit of a timeline up here for us. New Mexico becomes a territory in 1848, and in the time period directly after it, we see an influx in Anglo-American settlers to the region. And with that, the demand for water and the number of disputes among individuals increased significantly. By the year 1900, water disputes were transferred to be under the jurisdiction of territorial district courts. And this research seeks to answer the question, how did individuals employ the concept of expertise in water disputes in this specific county, and to what effect? Now, I chose the years in this research, 1900 through 1912, with a lot of intention. These are the last 12 years of New Mexico's territorial period, and they mark a significant bracket around some of the most influential water-related decisions in the state. 5 years before the first state water code, which established a centralized expert, or the Office of the State Engineer, and 5 years after the 1907 water code. This research uses the legal system and analyzes it as a site that distributes what scholars of critical legal studies call geographies of power. The courtroom is a space where environmental knowledge claims are wielded against one another. There are winners and losers, and decisions made in the courtroom result in change in one's access to space or a natural resource. My proposed method for this research is a hybrid model of a document content analysis and a discourse analysis on all of the documents submitted during the 23 civil disputes in this time frame. These include things like witness testimony, statements, as well as maps. This thesis is rooted in a social constructivist framework and uses interpretive inductive reasoning, where I recognize that knowledge is situated in its social and cultural as well as historic and political contexts. I hope this project will contribute to scholarship in Western water by helping to fill the gaps around how legal institutions like the courtroom help to establish the US as a colonial power. As growing cities continue to demand rights to water, it is critical to understand the historical, legal, and geographic factors that help to set up the modern water property regime so that we can strive to go forth solving water disputes equitably in the future. Thank you.
All right. Got both Rossiter students going one after another here. Hi, everyone. My name is Harrison Collett, and the title of my thesis research is Reclaiming Fish and Fowl, the Co-Production of Wildlife in Columbia Basin Project Infrastructure, 1970 to 2000. And my advisor is also David Rossiter. So I want to start my presentation with an important definition. I have a really important actor in my research that will help to kind of lay the groundwork. And that actor is the Bureau of Reclamation, which is a federal agency responsible for capturing water for human use in the arid American West. And so it's really important to understand how the Bureau of Reclamation forever changed the history of Eastern Washington when they built the Columbia Basin Project. The Columbia Basin Project takes water from behind Grand Coulee Dam and distributes it across the Columbia Plateau. And to do this, the Bureau constructed an irrigation network composed of thousands of miles of canals, ditches, wasteways, and reservoirs. Some structures in this irrigation network have provided more than irrigation from the very beginning. Structures like you can see here in the Potholes Reservoir. And these areas serve as places where animals can congregate, and there are also spaces where state and federal fish and wildlife managers intervene on these animals' behalf. And so this confluence of workers, of animals, and of hydraulic structures all lend support to Bureau of Reclamation claims that the project provides substantial benefits to fish and wildlife in the region. So my research excavates the specifics of these claims, asking what animals benefited and where was habitat created, and ultimately, how was scientific expertise and human labor combined to create a distinctive conservation practice. I also prioritize how hydraulic structures of the Columbia Basin Project, reservoirs, canals, and the like, mediated fish and wildlife interventions, and how this then oriented the construction of nature in the region between 1970 and 2000. Starting the study in 1970 offers a unique entry point to trace the interactions between humans, hydraulics, and animals in the region, because it was the very first time project planners had to consider their impacts to the environment. and that is due to the passage in that year of the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires federal agencies to evaluate the consequences of proposed actions. So to this end, the Bureau enrolled Washington State Departments of Fish and Game to manage and research the impacts of irrigation to wildlife in the project area. I end my study in 2000 because this is around the time that we begin seeing information related to fish and wildlife management being published online on the internet. And so my method begins with archival research, where I'll be looking at materials such as reports and agency communications produced during this time period. I'll be articulating connections and patterns between documents and across time to better understand how a conservation practice in the Columbia Basin Project was constructed and how it is distinctive in this hybrid human-non-human environment. My research will contextualize what types of wildlife we see today, and it will also contribute to literature characterizing human-non-human relationships in irrigated agricultural environments. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Wait, is it working? I think it's working. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Bo J. I'm a master's candidate in the Environmental Studies Department. How many of you have animals? That's a lot of you. I'd like you to take a moment to think about how you would protect your animals in a disaster and how that experience would impact you emotionally. I'll be studying the 2025 LA fires for my master's thesis entitled Mapping the Emotional Impact of the Los Angeles Fires on Urban Farms and Human Livestock Relationships. Through the month of January, 14 destructive wildfires devastated Southern California. By the end of January, the LA County fires consumed nearly 50,000 acres. Over 200,000 people were evacuated. More than 18,000 structures were damaged or destroyed, and 30 individuals were killed. The estimates of animal loss and displacement remains unknown. Rapid onset disasters impact all types of animals, companion, agricultural, and wild. Unfortunately, literature focuses exclusively on human companion animal relationships without acknowledging the importance of human farm or human wild animal relationships. Research shows that people consider their animals when making disaster-related decisions, and that they may even forego evacuation plans if faced with being unable to rescue their animals. In recent urban wildfires, including the LA wildfires, people have lost their lives refusing to leave without their animals. Urban farm animals are important to human social systems by providing food, reducing food miles, building community, increasing wild biodiversity, enhancing human-animal relationships, and helping build resistance to climate change. Research has yet to look at how human livestock-animal relationships fare or are impacted by disasters, or consider what policies and procedures could be implemented to better mitigate and address the impacts to these animals and their humans. This research is important because urban farm animals have fewer protections and receive less concern when disasters strike. Disasters like the LA County wildfires have profound social psychological impacts. These events affect resources, sense of community, can lead to forced migration, loss of personal and professional identity, community and support networks, and can create a reduced sense of control and purpose, reduction in happiness. Scholars have been interested in looking at ecological emotions as factors that enhance or inhibit responses to environmental phenomenon like disasters. I'll be studying the following ecological emotions: eco-anxiety, which is the worry or distress triggered by concerns about climate change; eco-guilt, which is the feeling of remorse or regret experienced when individuals feel that they are not doing enough to impact climate change; eco-grief, which is the feeling of sorrow or loss experienced in response to environmental changes or degradation. Few studies assess how animals may factor into the social psychological experiences of disasters. And while animal companionship may help to better navigate anxiety, grief, and guilt, the loss of animals in disasters may result in a heightened experience of these emotions. This summer, I will be sending out a mass survey in the mail and online to those who were impacted by the fires and conduct interviews of some of those individuals. The goal of my research is to better understand how human connection to animals factors into rapid onset disasters like urban wildfires, and if the recognition of human-animal relationships can better enhance evacuation and resource allocation. I hope that my research will provide important policy implications and suggestions for better protections for urban farms and livestock, and that it will provide awareness to communities on the importance of considering animals before, during, and after disasters. Thank you.
Pretty sure it's me. There we go. It's J-A-J-O, so. Hi, everybody. I'm Claire Johnston. I am also a master's candidate in the Environmental Studies program, and my advisor is Dr. Tammy Laninga. So today I want to start with the question, who defines a community? It's this word we throw around a lot, but what does community actually mean? And that's an especially important question to ask in a community forest, where the community actually has a voice in how decisions are made and how forests are managed. And my research is specifically focused on the roles of Native American tribes and the way they're engaged in leading and contributing to the establishment, management, and governance of community forests. And so a community forest is a rapidly growing model of collaborative local forest ownership and management. But I'm going to take a second to explain what that actually means. So over time in the United States, we've seen a rapid change in forest ownership across the entire country to being primarily owned by private groups like timber investment management organizations, private forestry companies, and real estate trusts that are really focused on short-term profits that they can get from forests. And that has some negative consequences for communities, right? If you're looking at somebody that's going to go in, clear cut all of the trees, and then leave the forest for the next seller, it might end up having really big significant consequences in your watershed for wildlife health and habitat. It might even cause landslides in your community. We see that a lot in Whatcom County. So the goal of a community forest is to restore community long-term ownership and management on lands in your community, and for community members to actually have a voice and a role in decision-making for that forest. And those forests look extremely different. I have two pictures up here, and the one on top is members of the Kalispel tribe in eastern Washington, and they're really focused in their community forests on educational opportunities for youth and tribes. They do harvest trees, but a major focus is giving young tribal members out on the land, and that's where a lot of the funding for their forest goes. The one on the bottom is at Nisqually Community Forest, and that is more focused on having really reliable, sustainable income from timber harvest for the community over time. So they can look really different, focus on timber jobs, focus on healthy wildlife habitat, recreation, etc. And there's lots of funding available for these forests, federally, state, millions of dollars every year included in the budget. And again, because the community is actively involved in kind of this management, it's really important who is a part of that community making those decisions and which stakeholders are serving in advisory roles, management roles, governance, board roles, all of the things that actually have an impact on what happens over that forest in the long term. All of these forests are really different, but they have one thing in common, and that's that they've been stewarded since time immemorial by tribes. Tribes are America's first stewards. They've cared for natural resources reciprocally forever, sustaining cultures and economies by taking care of resources. And tribes have an inherently different approach to stewardship than other stakeholders or partners. And often that's a focus on retaining non-timber forest products like fish and wildlife species, fungi, and other forest resources. So the map over here is the study area I'm going to be using, which is the Northwest Community Forest Coalition, and that's mostly Washington and Oregon, a couple forests in Montana and California. And I'm going to be looking in this region, which is 33-ish or 34-ish forests. And the ones that are in brown are actually the only forest that it's publicly available that a tribe has been involved in establishing the forest or holds a role of power in the forest. And I kind of want to know why. The funding is explicitly available to tribes. Why are tribes not as involved as other government entities throughout this region? So my questions in my research are, how have Native American tribes been involved in establishing community forests in the Northwest? What processes and specific engagement strategies for community forest practitioners have resulted in meaningful tribal engagement, and those three that do have tribes involved, and what factors would support Native American tribes to become owners or co-managers in the future community forests. And I'm using a triangulated mixed methods approach, where I'm doing some document review, so all of the guiding documents of how these forests are managed. I'm doing surveys with everyone who's a member of the coalition and tribes that are involved in the coalition, and then I'm doing interviews with tribal members and community forest practitioners to dig deep into understanding that why. And the goal of this research isn't to say this is what tribes should do or to create generalizations about community forests, right? They're all unique. But it's to provide documented successful strategies for tribes getting involved and having a pathway to ownership, because owning and managing land is power. And ultimately, I think that's part of our role in respecting treaty rights, which are the collective reason we're all here. Thank you.
Okay, hello, my name's Taylor. I'm working with Aquila Flower, part of the Spatial Institute. And Gary Oaks, where were they, where are they now, and where are they going in the future? That's kind of the main idea of my thesis. And to start slightly depressing, Gary Oak woodlands are disappearing at an alarming rate really across the entire West Coast, making them one of the most endangered and threatened ecosystems in Washington especially. Now, historically, these ecosystems were maintained by frequent low-intensity cultural burns carried out by many Coast Salish tribes. But since the colonial displacement of Indigenous people and their land management, fire exclusion has become the silvicultural norm. Now, because of it, on Vancouver Island, we've lost 95% of Gary Oak habitat only in the span of about 180 years. And in a similar time frame, we've lost a quarter of oak dominant stands in the Puget Trough region, which has been overtopped and converted into conifer dominant stands today. Now, across their range, they have contracted due to land conversion, not only by conifers and invasives, but also because of agricultural and urban land development as well. All along, climate change is only compounding these ecological pressures that Gary Oaks are already facing. Now, while Canada and Oregon have extensive research on Gary Oak distribution, the vast majority of Washington still lacks a comparable data-driven record of past and present range. This is especially true on the San Juan Islands, which is my primary study area. Now, the absence of an ecological and spatial baseline is a major barrier for nonprofits and government agencies that are out there doing the restoration work on Gary Oak woodlands today. Without knowing the original extent and structure of Gary Oak woodlands, we risk implementing reactive and short-sighted fixes. I think by far the most insightful thing I've learned in my time of doing forest restoration is technical solutions will never solve technical problems. Anything we implement that's short-sighted risks being short-lived and doesn't get to the heart of the issue. Now, in this, we recognize that while understanding the historic trajectory is essential, we need to restore Gary Oak woodlands to the changing climate conditions that we're facing today, as well as the climate conditions they will face in the near future. Now, to address this, my thesis combines historical geography and climate modeling as well to establish a historical reference for one, and as well to assess the future habitat suitability change caused by climate change. First, I'll map the range of Gary Oak woodlands on the San Juan Islands using archival sources as early as 1888. By comparing past and present land cover, I'll then quantify what's been lost and how woodlands have been replaced, at what rate they've been replaced, and what remnant patches persist today. Next, I'll build something called a maximum entropy model, which will predict how suitable Gary Oak habitat may shift under moderate and high emission climate scenarios over the next 80 to 100 years. And the result of my thesis will be a data set that tells us where Gary Oaks are today, where they were in the past, and where they might go in the future. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here in this lovely windowless room on such a gorgeous, gorgeous day. My name is Kaitlin Barrailler. I am also a master's candidate in the Environmental Studies Department. I'm advised by Cameron Whitley. And my project is on coral, how we represent it, how we talk about it, especially within conservation organizations like zoos and aquariums. So first, I want you to kind of imagine for a second that you're in an aquarium. You can close your eyes if you like. And you approach a very large tank, and it's full of all sorts of colorful corals. There's colorful fish swimming around. There's a lot of lush greenery, rocks, everything like that. And kind of down near the bottom of the tank, you see this squishy, mushroom-shaped animal kind of hanging out there in the mud at the bottom. And it's sort of scooching along the substrate there, and you're wondering, you know, is it searching for food or is it just looking for somewhere a little bit more comfortable? So you go to look at the plaque underneath the exhibit, and this is what you read. Meet Hattie, a walking mushroom coral with a taste for adventure. Unlike many of her coral cousins who stay rooted in place, Hattie can pick up and move whenever the mood strikes or when things get uncomfortable. She loves the soft, muddy seafloor where she can nestle in and feel right at home. And if the neighborhood gets too stressful, no problem. She puffs herself up with water and scoots away to find a better spot. If you were a mushroom coral like Hattie, where would you choose to live? So in a nutshell, this is critical anthropomorphism. And essentially what we're looking to do here is to strategically point out similarities between humans and animals in a way that helps us better connect with them. And this has been shown to be really effective for more charismatic megafauna. So think like polar bears, sea turtles, a lot of those really successful conservation campaigns that we've seen. But we're not quite sure yet if these same strategies will work for a marine invertebrate, especially one without a face, like Hattie the coral here. And we can see specifically how empathetic language is utilized here. We give her a name. We use she, her pronouns instead of calling her an it. And we kind of, give you the same information that, you know her habitat, you can kind of glean, her behaviors. But also you might see some parts about her behaviors that you could see within yourself. And then we also encourage some perspective taking with this question at the end, right? So why are we trying this out? Why is this important? And essentially, what it comes down to is the state of our global coral reef populations. So to hit you with a massive bummer, of like last month, the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Report announced that over 83% of our global coral reefs have experienced bleaching level heat stress. So this is up from about 2/3 of our global coral reefs. That was kind of the last report. And this is only since 2023. So this by far is the worst coral reef bleaching event that we have ever seen recorded. So it's really important that we're looking at alternative strategies that maybe we weren't willing to try before, but we really want to see what works to help get people involved in coral conservation, because this is a really pertinent and critical issue, right? So I'm going to be testing out various kind of rudimentary exhibits and captions like this one, and I'm also going to be playing around with videos of coral moving to see if that helps get people to better connect with it, and if that encourages more interest in coral conservation, essentially. And I'm going to do this at the Seattle Aquarium over this summer, kind of do a little bit of like A/B testing. It's kind of like marketing, but with a little bit of a soul. And we're going to see what works, what doesn't, and do we just need to try something else entirely different when it comes to marine invertebrates like coral. And my goal essentially is to just add one more tool into the toolbox that conservation organizations can use. And it's my hope that I can better support the folks who are looking to protect our global coral reefs. So thank you.
Online people, hi, it's me, Aquila Flower again. I'm always here. So I'm teaching this class, communicating research results that all these students are in. That's why I was able to get them to come here. And we have 2 students who weren't able to attend, but I do have slides from them. I cannot do justice to their projects, but I just wanted you to know 2 other topics that you'll hear about. One is from Talali's work, looking at the effects of sea level rise, especially on infrastructure related to transportation in American Samoa. And she'll be doing field work and doing interviews to get a sense of what kind of impacts are important or valued by local residents there. And you'll show me the other one. Yeah, this other one. Amanda Smith also cannot be here because she is TAing for Xander right now in a different class. But she has research that's already underway looking into the factors that make neighborhood associations able to create a sense of community and engagement with the people who live there. She's doing interviews and surveys in local Bellingham communities, specifically Cornwall, Columbia, and Birchwood and Cordata there.
which will, I think, hopefully have some interesting results that other community associations may want to learn from as well. And Fred, your TA is not here either, and I don't have a slide from him. I'm sorry, so I just want to acknowledge he's doing research too, but I don't have a slide. Okay, grads, you knocked it out of the park. That was amazing. Wow, wow, so good. I will awkwardly hand this back now for question time.
Excellent. And thanks to you, Dr. Flower, for organizing the cohort and getting everybody ready for quick talks. So I think what will work well, if you all want to come and kind of stand by here, we can easily hand the mic off, keep the heat on a little bit, and we can open this up for Q&A, and I will try and moderate here.
So this is, I think what you're referring to is the 1970, the National Environmental Policy Act was put in place by Richard Nixon, I believe. Yeah, shout out Richard Nixon. And yeah, so this just really kind of put the consideration of the environment, kind of forced it into the imaginations and responsibilities of Bureau of Reclamation planners.
Oh, Claire with an add-on.
I just wanted to say, because I learned this year, like Nixon's actually kind of cool. Nixon, I know, right? It's wild. But Nixon also initiated the most recent era of federal tribal policy, and makes it more possible for tribes to have economic self-determination and make their own decisions about how they're managing their resources as sovereign nations. And that happened during the Nixon administration. So some cool stuff happened.
Goated president.
Well, while we're at it, if you take ENVS 305 with me, I'll tell you Nixon's the most environmental president. Okay. More questions? Yeah.
Shoot.
And repeat for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard that phrase from, I don't remember. The question was, what does technical solutions actually mean to technical problems, which is a great question. I learned that quote from the Environmental 101 class here. It was a summer class, and I don't remember the professor that taught me that, but it's basically a phrase that's getting to the heart of it. If you're not addressing the thing that is actually causing the issue, then anything we implement is not solving the real crisis. So if you do like, yeah, conifer thinning here and there with Gary Oaks, the conifers are still always going to encroach. So what's your primary restoration implementation? It's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a kidney wound. The kidney wound is still there, it's still bleeding out, and maybe it looks good, but you're not really doing anything. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but broadly. Yeah, specifically, I would do conifer thinning with, oh, the question was for online people, what was some of the work that I've seen that was technical solutions? We do conifer thinning in areas that were like vastly majority, or not oak dominant, sorry, conifer dominant, Pseudotsuga menzii, Douglas fir. And it doesn't really make sense to do it because there's nothing competing with it. It's just going to encroach in about 20 or 30 years after. If you're not burning, then sawing a bunch of trees is not really going to do anything. So things like that, short-lived.
So the question was what practical, or I'm assuming policy implications? Yeah, practical applications. Do I repeat it so that I can say it for the people? What practical policy implications do I hope to come up with from my research? Yes. So sorry. So currently the PETS Act, which is, I believe, the only kind of policy driven towards like animals in disasters, doesn't account for farm animals or wild animals. And so I think something that would be absolutely amazing would be to include these animals or create some sort of policy that supports them as well. As far as resource allocation, like animal-oriented resource allocation is, again, geared towards pets. We have the Humane Society, we have animal shelters. They're not like built to house these farm animals, and a lot of farm animals were lost in those fires because they weren't able to be evacuated. Even evacuation routes, you can't fit all of your chickens into your car with all of your dogs. So figuring out and planning for those disasters is really important to protecting those animals.
To add on to that, I was actually really curious about, I don't know if anyone's taken Rebecca Pachi Green disaster classes at all, but there's a specific story she tells of the problems with flood insurance and how essentially there was a farmer who his cows were drowning and they were not able to shoot the cows because they wouldn't get their insurance unless the cows died from the hazard itself. And I was curious as to, like, in that type of regard of in some like relatively more private but also federally legislative actions, like how like what you've seen with that and like how that could be addressed within like what you suggest at all.
I don't know how. Okay, the the paraphrasing is yeah. So the individual's question was asking about how insurance issues with insurance can create a lot of problems as far as animals go, especially farm animals. I think that's a really tough question. I don't know. Private insurance, I mean, we see it with medical insurance. There's not a whole lot of legislation can do, and that people aren't really talking about it or doing anything. So I'm hoping that, starting this research can kind of push for those things, push for these topics to be talked about, because it's not being talked about. It's being mentioned, but it's not being talked about.
I have a question for Amaya. And I was curious if you've seen evidence of strain from climate change on existing legal frameworks and solutions for water rights issues.
Yeah, thank you to my brother for that question. The question was, do I see any strain on water rights laws, politics because of climate change? The answer is 100% yes. This is getting a little bit into the nitty-gritty details, but basically there are these communally managed methods of water irrigation called acequias, and they used to be meant for subsistence farming and are now less so for subsistence. So people often will just use them for hobby farms, things along those lines. And they are definitely at risk in legislation as water resources become like less and less moving into the future, and things like cities are being prioritized more.
I have a question for Kaitlin. As far as your research, do you have a plan for like improving your topic as far as the future, as far as your citation, as far as quote use, as far as like questions and answers, as far as solutions to your project?
The question was as far as questions, quotes, and what was the solutions go. I guess like what am I looking to improve in general?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, great question. I think what I'm essentially hoping to do with this research is I want to disseminate it to the ACE for Wildlife Network. So that is Advancing Conservation Through Empathy for Wildlife Network. And that is a coalition of a lot of conservation professionals that are essentially looking to improve the messaging, and the way that conservation organizations like zoos and aquariums represent the animals in their care, right? And so that's a big thing. Because when you think of zoos and aquariums, I'm sure you all also have like this thing in the back of your mind that's like, ooh, like SeaWorld, you know, like that sort of thing. So it's tricky because a lot of these institutions have also benefited from the exploitation and the commodification of the animals in their care. So it's a really tricky, nuanced subject, but I'm hoping that through empathy, kind of the baseline there is that you have to care and you have to want to do better. And that's why they're honing in on empathy specifically to get people more involved in the long term, as opposed to just kind of romanticizing an animal and like, yeah, you know, I don't want to see it go extinct in the short term, but we want to see people valuing and caring about the world around us in the long term is the hope. It's been like, this is like, you know, hundreds of years of conservation work. So it's like, it's very tricky, but thank you for bringing that up for sure. Yeah, what's up?
Is there anything specific we should look out for that you'll be doing there this summer in changes?
Yeah, so I'll be posted up in the Ocean Pavilion with my little with these guys. And essentially the plan is that when you walk in and you know get your ticket or whatever, they're gonna hand you a wooden token. And then I will, you know, smile non-threateningly at you and hope that you will take part in my experiment and vote for essentially whichever caption kind of like suits your fancy the most. And one of the biggest kind of partners of the East Network is the Seattle Aquarium. And so I'm working with them really closely. They're wonderful. But also they see some improvements even within the Ocean Pavilion, which they just opened, that they would like to be able to do better. So a lot of this is also kind of gauging feedback from visitors at the aquarium. It's kind of interesting because they get this own special crowd of visitors, which they call the cruise line crowd, because the Alaska Cruise Terminal goes right through there, right? So they get a lot of people coming into the aquarium that like do not care at all. They're just like, I'm here at my cruise stop. I want to go find something to do, you know? But even for folks that are coming into a conservation org and they're like not really looking to engage that much, just looking for something to do, I'm hoping that when I'm there, I can get people to, you know, engage a little bit more. So yeah, thank you.
I'm gonna send the mic to Claire and I'm gonna loudly read you a question next to the microphone.
I don't have to repeat it. That's
Yeah.
great.
Hey, from John McLaughlin. How can members of the community encourage or coerce settler governments to engage meaningfully with tribes regarding community forest consultation, stewardship, access, etc.? Example, in Bellingham, City Parks issued a performative land acknowledgement for a community forest stating the place was traditional territory of the Lemhi-Nooksack peoples, but never consulted with them.
That's a good one. Yeah. Keep that chat active, and if there's any follow-up needed for missing a part of that, please feel free to comment. Well, I mean, I would like to acknowledge first, like I am a white settler, right? I'm a guest in this area. My family settled in Washington in 1854, where the Medicine Creek Treaty was signed, and was actually really responsible for planting a lot of Douglas firs through a seed business that resulted in monoculture forests. So I'm coming from that perspective. And so I think you probably would get a very different answer talking to a member of any of the tribal nations like Lemhi Nation, Nooksack Indian tribe here than maybe what I would give you. From my research perspective, I think there's a lot more than a land acknowledgement going on in these partnerships. And when you look at what creates meaningful change through process in our systems, it's long-term relationship building. And that can happen structurally, where you see in the last few years, Washington State passed an amendment to the Growth Management Act that actually requires local governments like counties and cities to offer to have tribes involved in their comprehensive planning processes. And that's a huge structural change. They now have a staff person that's supporting that tribal outreach. Federal governments are required to do consultation. But I think what really comes out of kind of from my perspective, professional experience is having individuals that care enough to build those relationships and follow through and have it be more meaningful than, hey, we did this entire process and
we're ready to have you review it, right? It's that inclusion from project onset and realizing that tribes are initiating and leading a lot of the research that's happening, like the community forest that's happening in Whatcom County, Stewart Mountain Community Forest. That was all initiated based on research done by the Nooksack Indian tribe and funded by the Nooksack Indian tribe. So I think what you can do as a private citizen is attend events for Lummi Nation and Nooksack Indian tribe, hear what they want to do, what they're saying, and be active in your city and local governments and ensure that they are doing meaningful relationship building and consultation and processes with tribes. In terms of community forests, that's, as we said, defining community is tricky, but every community forest is going to define community in a specific way. And you can look for public engagement processes that happen in your community and get involved in those when you're able to. And so keep an eye out. And if you're interested in a community forest, sign up for their e-news. They're going to be sending out surveys for like 3 months or asking you to come to forums. Go build relationships and kind of take part and an active voice in listening and being a part of your community.
Prizma. Yeah. Hey, I'm invoking moderator privilege to ask you a question here.
Oh, okay.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Were you seeing it all when you go back to Nepal and you see and talk to these communities that Indigenous knowledge is so lost that it's just like not there anymore, and that are you worried about that? Is that like that
Yeah.
could happen?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. Well, being a researcher, the question is that, am I worried that if I go to the field and not see any Indigenous traditional knowledge being implemented there? Well, as a researcher, I have not decided what I'll expect there, whether I'm getting it or not. It's to assess if there is, how much is there, and if not, like, that's one of the findings. Like, there's not. So it's like that. Did I get it clear? Okay.
So,
Yeah.
Very well said.
Yeah.
Research in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but yeah, great question. Yeah.
okay, I'm going to follow up with what kinds of questions are you most excited to ask folks?
Okay, so there are a list of questions I have for farmers that is about, firstly, I'm going to ask them, okay, where did you get your Indigenous traditional knowledge from? Like, was it passed by your ancestors, or was it something you implemented and it was like hit and trial method? How did it come? And eventually, it will be more about, does it help you or does it not? How has it been changed or evolved over time? And how has that been helping you growing the rice crop? Yeah, something like that, keeping it very conversational and very, natural, and yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Are we
thank you.
allowed to ask questions? Well,
Audience?
to Prizma.
Okay, yeah,
Well,
sure.
We're at our time for the
Okay, all right.
But
You can just ask me in the office.
Well, you said you asked us if you like,
Uh-huh.
Prizma asked us if we like rice, but you didn't specify
Oh, which rice?
rice.
Which rice?
There's many strains.
Oh, yeah.
Rice.
Which one do you like?
Long rice.
Same here. Basmati.
Nice.
Yeah, basmati. Yeah.
thank you, folks.